Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Water and Air. We're presenting this information tonight. I'm probably not going to use the microphone going through this because I need to pay attention to the computer. But the microphone will be available afterwards. Father Mark kindly brought this down, so when we have the question and answer period, if we have trouble hearing each other, we'll take this and we'll get someone to pass it around so that we can all hear each other.
We could move that a little closer if you want. Well, we could move the mic a little closer.
Yeah, it might help. Okay.
That's better.
Once again, I'm Steve Blakemore, and what you see here, of course, is a slide from the township where I live over in Jefferson County. We first made this presentation.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can everybody see that okay?
Is it clear enough for everybody to see it?
The video looks good. It's perfect.
Okay. I live over in Henderson Township, so we did this presentation over at our church there in Sykesville, and but it can be applied to just about anywhere where Marcellus shale drilling is going on. Just to talk very quickly, now I want to say something about this. I'm going to have to really go bang, 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 bang through this presentation tonight. It's very thick with information. It's got a lot of good information, practical information at the backside of it about things that people would like to know or need to know about things like leasing and forced pooling and all kinds of things. But to get through it, I'm going to have to ask that we hold questions until the end. There are cards on your table. If something's going by and you have a question, jot it down while you're thinking about it, and then we'll bring it out in the question and answer period afterwards. Our goals are that all of us learn a little bit more from each other. That learning will be able to continue after the meeting. We have some takeaway resources back there on the back page, back table, including a page with all of most of the important references from this presentation where you can look up stuff yourself, and that people will stay connected afterwards here in your local community to continue talking about it and debating the issues of Marcellus drilling. What we've done is we've selected some issues that we believe are among the most important. We have talked extensively with gas company representatives and the Pennsylvania Marcellus Center for Outreach and Research about the facts that are in this presentation and had them looked at so that we could make sure we were not putting out stuff that was factually incorrect. So if there are anybody from gas company representatives here tonight, afterwards please identify yourselves and please do speak up. We will have a discussion, and of course we have these resources for you to take away. Now, as a sort of ground rule for the presentation, we use Ronald Reagan's old phrase of trust but verify. That is, as you listen to this, we're going to be offering objective, documented information, but we are giving you the means to look it up and decide for yourselves. So we ask you to listen first and then Q&A afterwards. We're going to be talking in general about what's happening with this type of drilling, what are some of the benefits of it, what are some of the risks of it, what other kinds of impacts can we expect, and what can we all do. So, first of all, this is not your father's gas well. That's the old shallow well you just saw. This is what a typical Marcellus pad looks like, a very different kind of operation. A single Marcellus pad during drilling and fracking is about 15 times larger than the pad to drill a shallow gas well. Hydraulic fracturing, used in both conventional and unconventional wells, it has been around for about 60 years, but in conventional wells and unconventional are different, as we'll show in a minute. But whichever one it uses, it basically is a means of getting down into the gas-bearing strata, drilling through it, blasting some holes in it, forcing some water into it along with some chemicals to help the water get there, and then propping open the shale so that the gas can come back up the production casing. What we're talking about now with Marcellus is unconventional wells. These are wells that are able to get gas out of tight shales in very narrow seams. This is the technical term for it. High volume, slick water fracking from long laterals. We'll go through that piece by piece. There are 4 technologies involved with that. Directional drilling down a thin horizontal shale, usually meant laterally or horizontally. Multi-well pads, that is, a single pad has a number of different wells on it, somewhere between 6 and 8 usually is what they like to design. A very high fluid volume in the fracturing process to release gas from existing formations, and something that they call slick water to maintain pressure over long distances. The horizontal bores through the shale can extend for more than a mile. They've gone as much as a couple of miles in some places. And long laterals, part of the definition, corresponds to that directional drilling off of those multi-well pads. Directional drilling is represented here by that horizontal that you see on the left side of the picture. The old conventional style of drilling using hydraulic fracturing is on the right side, just a vertical bore that goes down and then fractures into the gas-bearing strata right around the bore. In horizontal drilling of this type we're talking about, it provides greater access with a smaller footprint at the surface. And there will be usually multiple horizontal wells from a single drilling pad. This one shows 6 different wells coming off the center of a drilling pad, draining between 200 and 400 acres. High volume, part of the definition, refers to huge amounts of water, anywhere between 2 and 9 million gallons per bore, that is per well, along with sand and chemicals, at pressures of 15,000 pounds per square inch or more, which is about what a thermobaric bomb used in Afghanistan delivers when it explodes, fracturing the shale and creating cracks for the gas to flow. The pad may have a 3 or 4 million gallon freshwater impoundment. In this case, that's the one in the back side of the picture, and a separate lined impoundment in the front of the picture for the frac fluid or the wastewater that comes back up from the well. Sometimes they use steel tanks, the blue ones usually having fresh water, and the orange ones sometimes containing the frac fluid water. Sometimes this is used in conjunction with the pond, and they'll bring by pipeline the water over there to feed it into the hydraulic fracturing equipment. Slick water fracking refers to lubricating the water. I know this sounds a little bit funny, but water does have friction. And in general, the kinds of chemicals they're using serve these functions. They reduce friction, they reduce bacteria to prevent slime, those are biocides, a surfactant to prevent clogging, a scale inhibitor to prevent pipe coating, rust inhibitors, and some more. There are a lot more, but they're not all used in a single fracking job, but these are all chemicals that have been used in fracking on this slide. About 3/4 of what goes down the hole is known to have adverse health effects. Of course, what matters there in part is at what concentrations, but an analysis has been done of hydraulic fracturing chemicals used on that previous slide, and about 3/4 of them have adverse health effects. Now here's a well pad with hydraulic fracturing in process. Then also part of the gas field will be compressor stations and pipelines connecting each well to go to the compressor stations and send the gas down the line. Lots of trucks. These are different kinds of trucks. There's a sand hog in the upper right, and there's various other trucks in the crane delivery equipment that you see. And then there's also the waste disposal aspect of these frac fluid ponds or wastewater ponds on each site, where the flow back coming back up from the well during the drilling gets put into that before it's taken away. There have been instances where it has been put on roads, but that is being phased out at this point. Now here's a computer generation from Chesapeake Energy. I think I have this on your reference sheet. It's really nice to look up and kind of see how all the pieces of the equipment fit together to produce the pressure that goes down in the hole to release the gas. It's not as neat as the computer picture. In real life, it's a pretty messy thing with big diesel engines and 40,000 horsepower, etc. And it's a big, noisy, messy process that goes on to do hydraulic fracturing. Each lateral down in the shale is fracked in stages Usually there are 8 to 12 stages per lateral, and those dots you are seeing are indicative of different stages of perforating the pipe down below, the production casing they call it, and then shooting the water and chemicals into that. After fracking, there's reclamation. That little size of the 2-car garage that you saw bouncing in there, that was a statement made by one gas company official about what a pad would look like after reclamation. The one on the bottom of the picture is the picture you see on the Marcellus Shale Coalition website. That only has a single well in it, that little thing they call a Christmas tree in the middle of it. More typical would be the one on the upper left-hand corner where you have 6 wells that were left behind to continue collecting the gas, and that's a much larger pad even after it has been reclaimed from the construction phase. There are certain unavoidable impacts. Dr. Anthony Ingraffia of Cornell University is the source of a lot of this information, one of the leading fracture mechanic people in the country, and he speaks of certain unavoidable impacts of this type of drilling. First of all, there's going to be a higher well density, many more per square mile. That's because the gas is everywhere in the shale, and if they want to get it all, they got to put enough wells out there to get it all. They're not prospecting for pools of gas like the old shallow wells generally did. There'll be a lot of industrial development over a very large area, lots of heavy equipment operating 24/7, 365 days a year. Is that me? Much more frac fluid, millions of gallons per bore. A lot more waste, chemicals, heavy metals coming up from the shale, norms. Somebody has a phone, I think. Norms are normally occurring radioactive material. You'll hear that again. And VOCs, it stands for volatile organic compounds. That is organic compounds that can get in the air and spread around. And those are brought up from this type of drilling. And much more fugitive emissions of methane. That is an equipment problem that you'll see described later, where there's a lot of leakage in the equipment that's used in gas fields. Of course, there will be accidental releases of hazardous materials. The more drilling you do, the more the accidents there are going to be. And there's basically no known cumulative effect on air and water from these releases into the atmosphere and into our groundwater. This is an industry that is operating at a very fast pace right now, well out ahead of any studies that can tell us what to expect in terms of cumulative long-term effects. And there will be an increase in powerful greenhouse gases from some of the gases, methane and butane, that are associated with this type of drilling. I'm going to spend a few slides here talking about density. It's an important issue in the Marcellus drilling. The gas is everywhere in the shale, so the wells have to be everywhere. This type of drilling, unconventional drilling, does give fewer wells in relation to the number of verticals that are needed to tap all the gas. But fewer wells is still more land taken. Here's how the industry describes it. If you look at the illustration to the left, you would need all those vertical wells to get the gas out using the conventional design. Whereas with the high volume slick water fracturing of long laterals, on the right side you see that it would be possible to start from one center of the pad, go down with 6 wells, and essentially drain all the gas in that shale. However, at the surface, Marcellus well pads actually will require about 22% more land during construction and 53% more land after reclamation than all conventional shallow wells ever drilled in Pennsylvania since 1859. There have been about 350,000 of those. The Marcellus construction phase will use 142,000 or so acres, whereas all 350,000 of those wells drilled since 1859 used less than that. Marcellus production pads, that's after they've reclaimed it and they're continuing to harvest the gas, will use 53% more land than all of those production pads of all those shallow wells we see all over the countryside right now. The Marcellus estimate is over about 50 years, maybe 60,000 acres continuing to be used for the production phase versus a little under 5,000 acres for the That figure looks a little bit wrong, but in any case, the 53% is correct. More land will be used by the reclamation phase of Marcellus. Density and spacing, here's the ideal. 1 square mile, 640 acres, could be reached from one pad with multiple wells per pad. That's what the industry says. That's a good thing about this stuff, is that it won't take as many well pads to get to all the shale. However, that's very unlikely without public policy, because there are surface barriers. Not all the land up above is leased. It's hard to get 640 acres together to be drilled, that kind of thing. Now, what would ideal spacing look like in order to get all the shale under the approximately 23,000 square miles in Pennsylvania that the experts expect to be drilled? Well, here's one plan that Chesapeake Energy did up in New York State that shows a whole bunch of square mile sections. They're not square, but they're rectangular, with a well right in the middle of each one of them. Ideally, if they could place the wells like this, they could drain every last drop of gas from the shale down below this area of New York. The ideal medium development of well pads in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, would look something like this. You're beginning to see the grid, I'm sure, a very rational sort of spacing of all of the wells. This was done by the Nature Conservancy with the input of the gas companies and DEP. And here, looking at the whole state, and it's the main part of its Marcellus region, what they call the fairway, you would see that we would have approximately 180,000 wells drilled over a period of, that's wells, the pads would be less than that, but this is kind of what the spacing would look like. It would be pretty much all over the place. Density, Dr. Ingelder at PSU, who's one of the leading experts on this, predicts about 1 pad per square mile, 8 wells, each of those wells draining 80 acres down below, with roads and pipelines going to each of those. Now, I looked at what would that look like in Henderson Township. Well, it's not likely we'll have 80 acres. It's not likely that we'll have 1 square mile spacing in Henderson Township. But if we did, we would have 22 pads. It's a 22 square mile township, and 176 wells. And it would look something like this right here. There's already one well that you see at the far right corner, upper right corner there, that's being drilled. It's being flared right now, in fact. There are several others that are permitted, and all of the orange blocks would be potentially additional wells that would have to be put in to completely drain the gas under Henderson Township. Now, let's look at some other views of how the well spacing has happened in places like the Barnett Shale in Texas, density in other nearby areas of Pennsylvania, and density in forested areas of Pennsylvania. This is a picture of Dish, Texas, in the Barnett Shale. The pad spacing is 1 pad every 40 acres, 16 pads per square mile. That is very unlikely in Henderson Township or anywhere in Pennsylvania. It's a little different kind of formation down there, and they don't have the kind of surface impediments that we have here in terms of getting that kind of spacing. This is much more likely. This is from Hickory and Houston area down in southwest Pennsylvania. These are actual well pads that have been developed already. There's a lot of development down there. There are about 82 well pads in a 40 square mile area. The ideal would be 40 pads. Remember, one per mile, 1 per square mile. But already they have twice the ideal because of things that are going on in the surface in terms of leasing and mountains and rivers and whatnot. Jefferson, Pennsylvania is starting to look a lot like Hickory. You can see there the pads spreading out across the landscape there, also in southwest PA. So the conclusion on this is that the ideal 1 pad per square mile, which is sold by the industry as a lower impact on the surface, is not probably what's going to happen. More than likely it's going to be 2 to 3 times more pads per square mile, each of them draining less than a square mile because of competition between the companies, because of some land not being leased and so forth. Finally, on this spacing, let's look into the forest for just a brief second. This is the Allegheny National Forest. You can see the kind of development that has gone on there already. In the Tioga State Forest over in the northwest part of the state, the Natural Resources and Conservation Office of the state looked at this and said, what's going to happen as a result of well drilling. And one of the things they found out was that the primitive areas of the forest that are represented on the before picture would be severely reduced by 80%, in fact, as a result of digging all those wells and putting in all those roads. So we'll have a pretty substantial effect on forests that are developed. Also, regarding forests, if frac impoundments of this type are used, they definitely will be a danger to deer and other wildlife if they're not fenced off properly. It's a salty type liquid that's in there. Animals kind of like it. If they drink it, we don't know what their meat is going to be like. We don't know whether they're going to be worth hunting. Those are unanswered questions. Summing this part up, we're talking about industrial development over large areas, heavy equipment, 24/7, 365. Now, to speak for a moment about the benefits of drilling, you hear this many times, that the gas industries will tell us, and it's true to some degree, all of these things are true. It meets U.S. energy needs, reduces imports of oil and gas. There are economic benefits. There will be jobs. There will be leasing and royalties for some. That will spur other businesses. And the end product, that is the stuff coming out of our stove in the kitchen, burns cleaner than other fuels or heating our houses. Other benefits of unconventional drilling is that there's really no other way to get the gas than this. It couldn't be done before, and there will be more gas from fewer well pads, albeit given what I just said about the ideal not usually being attainable. However, as Senator Casey mentions on his website, we have to remember that Pennsylvania has been through a lot of extraction industries in the past that have left permanent scars from poorly regulated booms, be they timber or coal or strip mining, that have left behind things like acid mine drainage that we're still working with, and that have us still reclaiming previously mined land. So we're in the midst of another boom now, and the question is, are we being careful enough to manage the risk, and what are we going to leave behind from that? Okay, some baseline facts. I told you I was going to go bang, bang, bang. What is the gas industry telling us? What are they telling their investors? They're slightly different. What they tell the public and what they tell their investors. What's science telling us, and what are people living near gas wells telling us? Well, the energy lobby says that hydraulic fracturing is not new, that fracking has been going on for 60 years or so, and that more than 1 million wells have been drilled using hydraulic fracturing. Therefore, it's a proven safe technology. But scientists like Dr. Ingraffia and government officials overseeing this stuff, fracking itself is not high-volume slipwater fracking of long laterals. Vertical drilling, conventional drilling, has been using a fracking technology since the 1940s. But most of those 1 million fracked wells that the industry points to are verticals. Only less than or about 30,000, and this is nationwide, are these new type of wells. And I got that from the PSU Marcellus Center for Outreach and Research. Unconventional drilling uses these 4 technologies that I described before that were developed just about 20 years ago. In Pennsylvania's first Marcellus-type shell was drilled in well was drilled in 2005. The Marcellus Shale Coalition, which of course is an industry lobbying group, calls it an environmentally proven production method. But Range Resources, one of the better companies in the state, in terms of its safety record, tells the Security and Exchange Commission, as it must inform its investors what the risks are, that as they get down into these deeper horizons in the shale, more geologically complex areas, there are a lot of what they call unknown downhole risk that they're going to be running into. So they have to tell their investors that, because it could be that they could make a big mistake and it's going to cost them a lot of money, and people are not going to make as much money as they hope. Dr. Ingraffia, again, a leading fracture mechanic scientist, trains people for the gas industry, says this, and this is very significant. They're still inventing the technology. It's still an industrial process that has not yet reached a steady state operating procedure. Basically, every well is different because every formation they go into is going to be different. So in a sense, he puts it, they're making it up as they go along. What are the risks of drilling for gas? Well, there are environmental impacts on humans and forests, wildlife, on water, air. There are associated health impacts on humans, livestock, our crops. There are community impacts, such as the effect on our roads, the demands on our emergency response systems. And there are economic impacts, such as those jobs, the leasing, and what happens to property values in gas drilling areas. There really are so many issues. Let you take this in for a moment, and there's really too little time to go deeply into all of them, but you can kind of see that water and health problems and air and spacing and wastewater treatment are among the more important. So let's start with water. Let's start with some assumptions and values about water. No amount of money from leasing or royalties can replace ruined water. We would not ruin our home or our farm water. We would not ruin our neighbor's home or farm water. The loss of home water could result in trucked in or treated water, it has in many cases. The loss of farm water, for all practical purposes, means the loss of the farm. I know that I've got 40 goats. I can't possibly get enough water buffaloes to take care of them. So those are some assumptions and some values sort of wrapped up together about thinking about the water issue. Water issues break out into two parts. How much are we consuming, and are we hurting water? Are we contaminating it from either deep down below, where we're drilling in the shale? Can fluids and gases escape from that at some point in time? Or from above ground incidences of vertical drilling problems and waste disposal accidents and so forth. Well, first of all, on consumption of water, it uses the water up. It does take it out of circulation. Most of the water that's used stays down in the ground afterwards and never comes back. There's estimates that Marcellus wells annually, at about 3,000 to 3,500 wells a year, will use about 50 million gallons per day, or $11 billion annually, about 90% of which stays down in the hole. Well, how much is that? It's not half of Pennsylvania's water by any means. Here's a graphic in which we placed the Marcellus 50 million gallon a day alongside other uses of water in the state that amount to about 10 billion gallons per day. And the Marcellus is at full production going to be about 0.5% of all of that. It is an important issue. It needs a little more study. This particular documentary talks about the degree to which more and more as time goes by, public water is sold for private profit. But we're not going to go into that tonight. What we want to look at is it's not so much how much water we're using right now, because we have plenty in Pennsylvania, unlike out west. But where is the water coming from? When is it being taken? How is it being taken? And how is it being permitted? Out in the western part of the state, we have what are called riparian rights to the use but not the ownership of water crossing our property. In the eastern part of the state, they have the Delaware River Basin Commission, the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. I'm not sure where Kerwinsville falls in on that. Might be part of the Susquehanna. But out where I live in Jefferson County, we have riparian rights. Which means if water crosses my property, I get to use it. But DEP has been issuing permits in the western part of the state, where a lot of drilling is taking place, without even informing the owners that they have these riparian rights. And this is a quote from DEP that doesn't require an operator, gas driller, to notify the landowners or demonstrate that it has the authority to make a water withdrawal. That kind of thing bugs a lot of people. Here's some other agencies or entities some of you may know that are really worried about the water consumption, especially when it's taken, where it's taken, headwaters, trout streams, etc., where it has in some cases been so dry that it's killed fish. There have been those kinds of incidences. So these agencies are looking into that. The Pennsylvania Forest Coalition has a number of good reports. I think it's on your resource sheet. About these kinds of issues with respect to water. So that's consumption. Now, contamination of water. There are risks from below, migration from the boreholes or from the shale. And there are risks from above, leaks and spills from these frac ponds, pipes, trucks, violations, screw-ups, frac water disposal, where do you put it, how do you get rid of it, and migration from these spills and leaks. What happens after you've had a spill or a leak? What kind of contamination are you looking at? Well, just to define migration very briefly, it's the movement of a gas or a fluid through fissures and porous openings in the rock, whether pre-existing or caused by the drilling. And the shale is naturally fractured pre-existing, but it's fractured even more by the drilling. In Dimock, many people may have heard of Dimock. There was a lot of well water contamination. I think 18 homes lost their water. That was not from the hydraulic fracturing. That was from faulty casing, a bad job on the part of Cabot. But in any case, methane then migrated into the well water of those folks. What about down below? Can gas and chemical-laced drilling fluids migrate from the shale into the groundwater? Well, there's a difference of opinion on this. Dr. Terry Ingelder, a geologist at PSU, says it can happen. Dr. Ingrafia says it's improbable but not impossible. Certain things need to happen, and they need to happen in a certain order where perhaps the fluids could get back up into the groundwater aquifers. The risk remains no matter how you look at it. Even Dr. Ingelder, when asked a question about whether there's some sort of unfractured, impermeable layer of bedrock between us and the shale that they're fracking that'll keep all that bad stuff down there, he said, there is no such thing as 100% unfractured, impermeable rock. So if you look at fracturing, what you usually see, the left side pictures from the Marcellus Shale Coalition, it looks like a really neat process. All of the fractures are even and symmetrical. But real-life fracturing, according to Ron Bishop, geologist at SUNY Oneonta, is like breaking a china plate into equal pieces. Very hard to do. They don't really know what happens when they do it, but they hope that it stays inside the shale. In 2004, EPA did a study of hydraulic fracturing in coal bed methane deposits, and they found that the drilling fluids migrated unpredictably through different rock layers and at greater distances than they had previously thought. By the way, that's the study cited by the gas industry as giving them a clean bill of health to go ahead and fracture. The conclusions of that study were jiggered a little bit politically at the end, and that's where that came from. But the actual study showed there could be a problem with this kind of migration. It's not that predictable. The industry admits, and this is from Schlumberger, one of the major players, that the ability to determine hydraulic fracture geometry is very limited. There are what they call geologic discontinuities. It makes it difficult. They're still learning. Dr. Ingrafia says they're still learning, except trying to learn what happens down there. Of course, they don't want to bust out of the shale if they don't have to, because they lose their gas and they get water in there and they get sued and all that. So they really don't want to do that, but they really don't know yet for sure. There are other people like Dr. Bufadel, a professor of hydrology at Temple University, whose computer models show that theoretically gas and fluids could rise thousands of feet from the shale below. So, gas and chemical migration into water from below? Well, no studies show that this new technology is unsafe. That's what the American Petroleum Institute says. And no studies show that it is safe. That comes from a investigative journalist at ProPublica who talked to 40 academic experts, scientists. He could not find a single study giving a clean bill of health to what's happening down in the shale. There are no studies. And part of the reason is that some of the companies are not giving up the information. They're not saying what chemicals they're using. They're resisting the scope of fracturing studies that the EPA is proposing. They're resisting efforts in Congress by paying lots of money to politicians. Also, where there have been cases of contamination, one of the usual results is that if there is a settlement with a landowner, the landowner must sign a gag order, not to speak about what happened at their place. So it's hard to do studies under those conditions. Now, the biggest risk from below. The industry is exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Why is that important? Because if 90% of the fluids stay in the ground, A 4 million gallon frac job, and that's a medium-sized frac job, will leave 72 tons of chemicals in the ground in that one bore. That means that in each square mile, where you might have 8 bores off a single pad, 582 tons of chemicals are going to stay down in the shale. If we project that out to do the 22,000 square miles that Dr. Ingelder says that could be drilled over the next 50 years, we're talking about putting 13 plus million tons of chemicals, many of them toxic, 75% of them harmful to human health, down into the ground and letting them stay there. Now, there is a program called the Underground Injection Control Program that EPA administers. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, they're putting lots of very dangerous chemicals away for permanent storage and must prove it'll never come back up in 10,000 years. Gas drilling companies did not want to be subject to that, so they got themselves exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act and that standard. And in fact, a former EPA worker who had authority over this area said that the oil and gas industry is the only industry allowed to inject hazardous materials directly into or adjacent to underground drinking water supplies, unchecked. The risk from above: spills and leaks from the frac ponds, truck accidents, violations, illegal dumping, burying waste, resulting migration into the ground and into the water, and the disposal of the frac water. Well, here we have a frac water pond. You can see at the back of the pond some overflow spots where the grass and vegetation has been killed, or surfactant in the stream on the lower right corner. Over in Bradford County, a woman has had fluids coming from her drilling pad that kills everything in its path, including big old oak trees, and that's her testimony. Of course, accidents can happen and spill, and those could find their way into the ground and the water. Well, what happens if a spill is not remediated? Remediation usually means that they come and they dig a whole bunch of dirt up quickly and they take it to the landfill. But if it's not remediated, what could happen? Well, Dr. Boufidel has looked at that a little bit in terms of, say, a spill from a frac fluid pond. After year 1, it's gone down a little bit. After year 2, you'll see the years are coming by there as I wait. His models show the migration of that spill into the ground, first down, by year 18 back up again, because water can rise underground. You know, springs come up out of ground. There are pressures that cause that. And basically what these set of slides are showing as a model is that such a spill, if it's not remediated, could leave a 200-year legacy of pollution around it. Also, we have to deal with the fact there have been a lot of violations so far in drilling in Pennsylvania, 1,614 of them, 1,056 of those with environmental risk associated with them. That's a very high rate. There are these kinds of problems: improper construction of wastewater impoundment, discharge of industrial waste improperly, violations of clean stream laws, etc. In addition, if you heard about FracNet that the state police ran, they pulled over all the trucks a couple of times now that are carrying around the drilling waste, and they found some real problems. That 1 in 5 inspected trucks had to be removed from service, and 1 in 2 of those trucks and drivers that were removed from service were carrying hazardous wastewater. So that is definitely something the industry needs to clean up. Of the 2,300 wells drilled in Pennsylvania to date, or approximately, only about a third have been fracked, so maybe 700 or 800. So these problems that we're seeing are happening in really kind of the infancy of this industry in the state. It's just getting started, and we're having those kinds of problems. Whatever happens, the frack water, the water that comes back up from the well, something has to be done with it. This story talked about dumping it into the rivers of Pennsylvania. The story, by the way, if you ever look it up on your research sheet, will allow you to interact with this little map here and see, okay, they dumped some water in Reynoldsville, and where did it go to Hawthorne, where there was an intake for drinking water. I want to remind you that the flowback water coming out from fracking, remember I said 90% stays down there? Well, 10% comes back up. So each bore, each well will eject about 7 tons of chemicals coming back up. And an 8-well pad, that would amount to 58 tons of chemicals. Meantime, the water coming back up has picked up toxins from the shale, including radioactivity, dissolved salts, and other total dissolved solids. So what's happening with it? Well, the industry says that their goal is to get to the point where they recycle all of that. They capture it as it comes back up and they use it to frack again and so forth. And they're committed to being a zero discharge operation in the state's surface waters. And they like to brag that they're leading the nation in recycling technologies and practices. And they do have some good stuff going there. But DEP, when it responded to that same AP story, it said 2 things. One, we just put in new rules effective August 1st of 2010 that are more comprehensive, that make it less of a problem to put some of this stuff into our waterways. But John Hanger said, the industry opposed us for 2 years at every step of the way before we could get those rules in place. So I don't know exactly how that jives with the previous statement about being committed to being a zero discharge operation. But there you have it. Now, frac water disposal. This is from an article that looked at the plans to deal with this stuff. By 2011, 19 million gallons of wastewater per day. But the first new plant to treat it is not really going to come online. These are treating total dissolved solids. There are a lot of plants, 14 of them in the state, that are taking this stuff. But they are not set up to deal with the total dissolved solids in it, and that's what's being developed right now. And as you can see from this graphic, that each plant will be able to treat about 400,000 gallons per day, but it would take 50 plants of that type to treat 19 million gallons a day. So the manufacturing of wastewater is far outstripping the ability to deal with it. In addition, you have studies like this one that show that the rock cuttings coming up from the wells are radioactive and sometimes end up in landfills, although landfills usually test for that. The study in New York State found that natural gas drilling produces radioactive wastewater with radioactivity 260 times the limit for safe discharge into the environment. So there's a concern that some of that water being taken to our treatment plants could be radioactive. At this moment, I don't know if they even test for that. I'm trying to get the answer to that from PSU. Conclusions on water contamination. Will groundwater be contaminated from surface level events? Well, sort of yes, of course. But the question is how often and where, and accidents or operational problems. Will it be contaminated from below, down in the shale? The answer to that, best I can tell, is maybe, but it's not really known. It's a gamble. It's a gamble that is proceeding. What about environmental incidents, groundwater contamination, other kinds of incidences that have been occurring? Range Resources spokesman told me that only in 0.25% of their wells do they have any such problem that affects the environment. Well, if 3,000 wells are drilled every year, that would be about 33 incidents every year. In all of the 5 states, that would be 7 or 8 incidents in Pennsylvania. And in the 5 states where the Marcellus is, at the Range Resources rate, there would be about 33 incidents a year with some significant environmental impact. However, Range is doing better than the state as a whole and others operating in the state. PA is already at 1 significant environmental incident per 150 wells. Dr. Engelder spoke about that to the Groundwater Protection Council, and he mentioned that statistic of 1 in every 150, and he said, well, some would say that this is a really good record for a difficult industry. Well, let's project that 0.6% failure rate to 3,000 wells. That would be 20 incidents a year. And think about what kind of risk is that? Well, to make it easy on our brains, let's suppose that they achieved 1 incident for every 500 wells that they drilled. 0.2%, better than Range is doing now. What would be the problem? Well, this is a problem of big numbers. If airplanes lost 0.2% of the planes flying through the air every day in America, 70 planes a day would crash. That's because there are 35,000 planes flying. It's a big industry. Their standard is 1 in 10 million. 1 in 1 million, but they achieve 1 in 10 million. That's their risk factor that they live with in their industry. So is 0.2% failure rate causing significant harm? Well, can we accept it? And the answer seems to be kind of like the Gulf water, the Deepwater Horizon and the Gulf. One really bad thing can happen, and it could affect a lot of people. If you have a 1 in 150 chance of ruining an aquifer, and it supplies thousands or hundreds of thousands, or in the cases of Philadelphia, for example, millions of people, that's a problem. Okay, here's just a very quick, I'm going to run through this very quickly. You won't hardly be able to see it, but there's a growing documentation of problems with water from both surface level and drilling problems that have occurred all over the country. And there's this particular set of slides is just sort of letting you see that these 34, 35 cases that are scrolling by you here have involved all kinds of things, all kinds of companies. It's not a problem that is all that unusual. There have been a little over 1,000 cases that have showed up in the journalistic literature about water contamination from around the country. And of course, these are all states that have shale. There are a growing number of reports. EPA telling communities, don't drink your water. Those kinds of things. Whole reports like Fractured Communities looking into that. Industry fights very hard against every claim of contamination. Range Resources down in Texas. I've read the energy and depth rebuttal of this. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not EPA. Range says they didn't do anything wrong. EPA says they did. Range says I'm not complying with the order. EPA says I'm calling the Justice Department on you. I mean, that's the way it goes. They fight everything like that. So that goes on. But still, we have more than 1,000 cases of contaminated water showing up around the country with this one common story. My well was fine before the gas wells came in. I lived here usually many years, then my water went bad after the wells went in. So we have to ask ourselves the question, are these best explained as a bunch of coincidences, or is there some sort of preponderance of evidence developing here? Now, let's move on to air quality. Yeah, we need clean water, but we also need clean air. What are the risks there? Remember this from earlier? I showed you these. Lots of trucks. About 1,500 trucks for each Marcellus well is one estimate that's put out there. It's one the industry likes, but the New York State Environmental Department, Conservation Department, estimated 7,000 to 9,000 trucks per well site over the course of its drilling and fracking. Drilling can kick up a lot of fine particle dust. There's the flaring of a well. Flares emit a lot of air pollutants. Myself, Tom, and Jenny went up to the one near us there in Henderson Township the other day. We stood there, each of us, for less than a minute and started developing headaches. There was something in the air and we got the heck out of it. These air pollutants downwind of natural gas flares can be a serious problem. There's air pollution beyond the trucks moving about with all their diesel engines. There's something called fugitive emissions. Here you see an infrared picture from the Barnett Shale of volatile organic compounds escaping through these tanks on the well site. Team 4, this is online, a very good report, where they went and they used the same infrared technology and they looked at what is coming off of these well sites in terms of air pollution. In addition, you have these frac ponds, which are being built out on people's farms that will off-gas organic compounds into the air. Dr. Volz at UPenn is an expert on this. He basically says we need a lot more research on that. There's not enough data available, but he's concerned about it. Everybody else, lots of people are concerned about hydrogen sulfide, which is a very common gas around gas drilling sites, extremely dangerous on health, even deadly. We know that the workers are advised to stay away from this stuff at even more carefully than the EPA recommends. That's how dangerous it is. We've seen some of their worker manuals advising them to do so. Neighbors of this frac pond have talked about the smells coming off of it and the headaches and the nausea that have resulted from breathing the fumes. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Barnett Shale gas drilling, there was a study done by SMU, Southern Methodist University, that the pollution coming off of gas drilling was equal to all the vehicular traffic in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So basically, it doubled pollution. DEP has only briefly looked into this in terms of a study. It did a study of some gas facilities in Southwest and Northeast, and you saw these kinds of news reports coming off saying that the air near the drilling sites is safe. Unfortunately, the way that DEP is designed its study, according to the Group Against Smog and Pollution and Dr. Dan Volz at UPitt, the study was really insufficient to draw such a broad conclusion. It was not a cumulative impact study. It did not go on long enough. The measures used were inadequate to say, no problem, it's safe. We don't have to worry about air around gas facilities. So we don't really know whether DEP did a study to get the conclusions it wanted. I doubt that from what I've read about them. It's more likely the press took shortcuts in saying the study found no problems and ignored some of the caveats that DEP put out there. But when you have water and air now working together, then you get into the health problems that are associated with this drilling. Now here's a few slides on some of those kinds of problems we're hearing from people across the gas drilling areas. You've got some very bad chemicals out there that can hurt you. Here's a short list of them that are involved in this drilling technology. And here is a list of health problems reported by people living near gas wells, water and air problems, loss of smell and taste, nosebleeds, onset of asthma, shortness of breath, swelling, skin rashes, lesions, chemical insensitivities, severe headaches, nausea, and vomiting. What's significant about this is that entities like ProPublica that have looked into this and talked to people thousands of miles apart in different gas fields, Wyoming, Texas, Pennsylvania, are finding the same stories from different people thousands of miles apart. Lisa Parr down in Wise County, Texas, complains of breathing trouble, nausea, headaches, rashes. Her body is scarred with pockmarks, balance problems, and chemicals in her blood that match an air sample taken by the state of Texas that showed some drilling chemicals in the air. Her doctors basically told the family, get out of the house. This is Emma Parr and her father, 50-year-old Bob Parr, who while they were living in that house suffered constantly from nosebleeds. Usually Bob Parr reports about 3 times a week he would just have spontaneous nosebleeds. Silt Mesa, Colorado, same kinds of things coming up to the point where the physician for this family said, get out of the house. Silt Mesa, Colorado, picture of the kinds of rashes that people have experienced. The Phyllis Carr family over in Fayette County lives downwind from 3 compressors, notices a strong chlorine-like smell, and says a good whiff will put blisters up your nose. An air analysis that was actually done for her by a private entity, the state didn't do it, found measurable levels of several toxic compounds, including acetone, benzene, chloromethane, ethanol, etc. You see them all there. Death, I don't know. This is one case where a woman interviewed in the documentary Split Estate got very sick after moving into a gas drilling area. Her doctor believes, in terms of cause and effect, that her problems, neurological problems, were brought on by pollutants in the air and in her water, and she just died recently. So in terms of concluding about these health issues, many people reporting same kinds of symptoms. There are some studies underway, especially in the West, where they're having big problems with this, and they want to try to find out more in a scientific fashion. And the Q&A part of this is, will people get ill in the presence of this industry? People in the gas field are saying yes. Will those people be in my family? Well, it depends on where we live and what we do. If you're a gas field worker, I don't know how they put up with it, but that is another question I put to PSU to find out whether gas field workers are unionized, whether they tell people if they feel bad, or if they just get used to some of these kinds of things. What about livestock? There have been a number of incidences across the country where cattle have gotten into some of the drilling fluids. In some cases, it makes them drop dead. In other cases, the agriculture department has put the cattle in quarantine because they're concerned about the quality of the meat that will end up on the table with these cattle having taken in some of these pollutants. Okay, now moving on to other impacts at ground level. Roads in our area, at least where we live, subsidence in Henderson Township. I don't know if you're undermined around here or not in Kerwinsville. Somebody will have to tell me in the Q&A. Emergency response issues and economic impacts of shale drilling. I think everyone's pretty familiar that township roads can get torn all the heck. It will happen. A lot of times the gas companies will fix it up themselves. Township officials have a lot of work to do to make sure that they can prevent this or make it incumbent upon the gas companies to fix this kind of damage if they cause it on township roads. In our area, we have a lot of Amish, especially on 410, where Jenny and Tom live, where a lot of trucks travel. A lot of these drivers are not Pennsylvania residents, may not be familiar with Amish buggies, and it puts them at more risk. So that's a particular thing. This happens to be my farm, by the way. This is the Kramer Mine workings under my 50-acre farm. And you can see it looks like a whole other world down there. And the question of subsidence that would be caused by gas drilling is a real one. Right now in Arkansas, they're looking seriously at some issues of increased earthquakes, earthquake tremors that they think may be associated with the vertical part of the drilling. Again, an unknown question. On emergency preparedness, I know our township supervisors are real concerned about this. They know that they're going to be seeing truck spills, they're going to be seeing site facility blowouts, which they're not prepared to handle. It really takes specialists to handle that kind of thing. And there are going to be accidents along the railways as they bring in the chemicals and sand for this activity. The one other thing we told our township residents, if you see anything like this happens that has to do with gas drilling truck, stay out of the way, call 911. Don't get involved because you could do yourself and another person harm. It's very dangerous. It's a hazmat situation. In a hospital ER out in Colorado, a young man came in. He'd been exposed to frac fluid for 10 minutes on his boots. And he'd gotten into a frac fluid spill. And the nurse that was exposed 10 minutes to the fluid on his boots began feeling kind of funny. Her skin turned yellow, she began vomiting, and it was a critical condition diagnosed as chemical poisoning. So hospitals are going to have to be prepared, and I know Geisinger and a couple of other health providers have said that they're working on this right now to get ready for some of those kinds of impacts. As far as the economic impacts, there will be a lot of jobs, but a lot of those jobs the specialist jobs are being filled by people coming in from out of state, but there will be a lot of Pennsylvania jobs, and there will be some temporary and who knows how long lasting multiplier effects. But one of the things that we all need to think about is that this is a boom and bust type industry. It comes and it goes very quickly. And what does it leave behind? If you look at studies that have been done of oil and gas drilling counties out west, and a recent one that was done of counties in the northeast part of Pennsylvania, one of the things you notice is that over time they lose population. There are fewer types of jobs. The diversified workforce becomes less diversified, more focused on energy, less focused on tourism, farming, berries, and all kinds of other things that are in the economy, organic farms like mine. And there's a bigger gap that develops over time. So this is sort of a cautionary tale that some of these studies that have been done of long-term impacts of jobs need to be considered. Up in New York State, they looked at it this way: $350 billion in that left column of wildlife, watching, hunting, fishing, dairy, grapes and wine, farms, tourism. Beautiful part of the state up there where this was done. Gas will bring in $16 billion, but there's $350 billion put at risk by the gas industry because there will be less wildlife, less hunting, fishing, less tourism. In fact, the town of Cooperstown just took a resolution. You know, Cooperstown, Hall of Fame baseball to say that they do not want the gas companies around them because they think it will definitely affect whether people will continue to come there. I don't know how it will affect Punxsutawney Phil. Somebody will have to do a special study on that. Property values in gas drilling areas this is an example from the Barnett Shale of a very nice, expensive home that dropped significantly in value from about $257,000, a 10-acre horse farm, a horse property, down to about $75,000. These studies are going on right now, by the way, just in contact with the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. They really don't know what to make of this yet. And no one knows whether, in fact, although people will get windfalls from leases and maybe windfalls from royalties, what will happen to all the properties around them in terms of their basic value? Something else to think about. Is this natural gas for America? Does this contribute to American energy independence? Well, MDS Energy over in Katanning likes to brag that it does. But at the same time, they're working with Knapp Acquisitions, who are so western Pennsylvania that they bleed black and gold. What are they doing? They're assembling 500 acres in Butler, Armstrong, Jefferson, Indiana, and Clarion for sale by the Royal Bank of Canada to Japanese and other foreign investors. The gas industry is also preparing to ship liquid natural gas overseas. This is a global industry, folks, so to keep the gas at home is going to be a challenge. Not to say that it won't happen, but it's also going to go where the market tells it to go. Now, these last few things are some sort of practical issues that come up every time people are talking about these issues, and I want to spend just a little bit of time on them before concluding. Leasing. On your research sheet, you'll see how to get a hold of this document. Get the answers before signing a lease. If you're thinking of leasing and haven't done it yet, this is a great document to read to help you think through some of the issues and help you get prepared to deal with the gas company. It's not very technical. It's more a value-oriented piece that helps you think through it. If you want something technical, Penn State Cooperative Extension has some very good resources on leasing. The one on the left here, Natural Gas Exploration, the Landowner's Guide, you can go to Senator Bob Casey's site and pull that up and read it online. The one on the right is really, what do you do if you get all this money? How do you handle it? Will it change your life? What will it do to your family's finances? So there's some real good stuff out there to get yourself armed and ready to be dealing with companies that are operating in Pennsylvania. If you're in a situation like a lot of my neighbors where you're only getting $5 an acre lease that's been stuck there for 15 years, and all the company has to do is come by and scrape the ground a little bit to say they're digging a well and they can hold the lease, well, then you've been fleeced. You haven't been leased. And there's an organization up in New York State that is working to bring such cases to the attention of the New York State Attorney General to ask if they can help these folks to renegotiate leases that were clearly done under false pretenses. And we've seen that particularly with the elderly in our area. I don't know if it's true, but the lady next to us who's leased her place for Marcellus, she fought tooth and nail to preserve 100-year legacy farms in our area. Her family's been on there for 5 generations. I seriously doubt she knows what a Marcellus well is, or what it's going to do, or what it's going to be like to have that flare across the way from her house. But there are lots of issues like that. And FLEAST is a good organization for reading up on some of that. This West Virginia Surface Owners' Rights Organization puts out great literature for landowners, practical literature. It's not ideological. It's things like, what if forced pooling? What if they try to take the gas from you underneath your property, even if you don't have it leased? And they give you some really good advice on how to think through that and to deal with that if that comes your way. Again, these are resources on your sheet back there that I hope you will take advantage of. What if a pipeline wants to come? What if the landman comes along and says, hey, guess what? Yours is the perfect place to put a pipeline. What are you dealing with there? This report here, again from West Virginia Surface Owners' Rights Organization, is a good way to school yourself on that a little bit. Water testing. Gas rights owners, those who own the gas rights below them, You can probably get the gas company to pay for pre-drill testing. I'm sure you can. You can negotiate that in the lease. You can increase setback distances better than what DEP gives you. The gas companies oftentimes will set back their facilities further in order to be able to drill your land. You can require post-drilling testing. If you're not the gas right owners, that's my case, for example, you can get your own testing. It's going to cost you a lot of money because you have to look at a lot of stuff that could come up from gas drilling. And I know we paid about $800 to have a baseline test done on our well. There are water testing companies like this one we use, Mountain Research, that will do that, do a real good job of it. It must be a third-party company. You can't do it yourself. You can't take the sample. There's also shaletest.org. Someone before the meeting asked me about this. This is a new group. They're on the resource sheet that will lend a hand to people that don't have enough money to get water testing so that they can get some baseline reports. Finally, and this was not in my Henderson Township presentation, but a couple words about politics. What is it good for? I guess I was inspired to this by one of the slides you'll see coming up. First of all, what are Pennsylvanians thinking about this issue? If you ask Pennsylvanians, as this survey did, most of them wanted a severance tax. Whether they were Republicans or Democrats, big majorities supported a severance tax. The severance tax did not happen. The severance tax could have helped localities to deal with some of the impacts. What are they thinking about fracking close enough to impact their drinking water? 2/3 of them are very concerned about that. If it's close enough to me to affect my drinking water, I'm real concerned about that. I'm in that 67%. Another 15% are somewhat concerned. If it's fracking and water quality in general, a total of about 80% are either very concerned or somewhat concerned about this. But that's what the people think. What are the state leaders doing? They're open for business for gas drilling and a lot of other things, but definitely open for business for gas drilling. They've said no to a severance tax, yes to more drilling in state forest, no to a moratorium, and people are asking, let's have a moratorium until we have cumulative impacts of drilling are well understood. They said, no, we already know enough. We're going ahead. And yes to $3.4 million in political donations from 42 gas companies. You'll see, if you can see it, a little fuzzy, but Tom Corbett right at the top with over $800,000 in the last election cycle from gas companies. And Joseph Scarnati right behind him, but that wasn't enough for Joe.
Super Bowl.
Joe got in a little bit of trouble because he went down to the Super Bowl courtesy of Consol Energy. Now he's trying to clean that up by saying, oh, I'm going to pay it all back. But the question of access, he's going to pay it back, but he's not going to pay back the plane trip because they were talking business on the plane trip. He's going to pay back the ticket price. And Joe has been invited by the head of Penn Environment to go with him on a road trip. So he could show him some of the things that are happening on the gas pads across the country. So we'll see if Joe goes along with that. I don't know about politics sometimes. This particular cartoonist suggested that it's kind of a rigged game in terms of what they're doing. They're exempt from the Safe Drinking Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. They're putting chemicals into the ground. They're getting gas out. They're putting money in the pockets of politicians. They're getting corporate profits out. Honestly, I put this here without knowing and attributing to any single politician that this is the case. I would not do that. Even Joe, and I've had lots of discussions with Joe. We cannot approach them like that. This may be a grain of truth in this, but these are people, serious Pennsylvania neighbors, friends, that we must talk to in other ways and present information to them where they can make better decisions than many of them are doing now. So when we ask the question, does it matter what people think in those surveys? Well, maybe not yet, but it could. This is a function of how much we talk to our township supervisors, our county commissioners, our state legislators, U.S. congressmen, and let them know of our concerns. Finally, I end with this old proverb, anonymous from the 17th century. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but the greater villain, the law lets loose, who steals the common from the goose.
Excellent.
And these resources here, that they're on the piece of paper in the back where Father Mark is. So don't trample them. All these resources are really worth taking and taking the time to look through some of this stuff, because this is a complicated issue. Now, questions, answers, comments? I'm going to take the microphone off, and I will ask Carol. Carol, could you do this? I want to get this down. And raise your hand if you have a question or comment, and so everybody can hear you. Carol will come with the microphone.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, on what proximity would you say a gas well would have to be before you would be in jeopardy of pollutants from like air quality or even water quality? Well,
the proximity issue, can you all hear me okay with in the room without a microphone? There are certain setbacks that DEP has in place now, 1,000 feet. For example, on the water issue, anywhere within 1,000 feet from a well, if that well shows up polluted within 6 months after drilling, the burden of proof is on the gas company that they didn't cause it. If it shows up polluted after 6 months, then the burden of proof is on you that they caused it. That's a big problem, because methane migration and drilling fluids and so forth have been known to travel up in Susquehanna County 3 miles. There can be depends on what's underground.
You're talking about air quality?
Now, air quality, all the studies I've read is if you're downwind from, say, a frac pond, and I don't mean 2 miles downwind. I mean, like in my case, I'm 3,500 feet from where a frac pond will be put in, if I can't stop it. You know, they don't have to put in frac ponds; they could collect it in boxes. But if they put one in and it off-gasses volatile organic compounds, I'm 3,500 feet directly downwind from that. My wife can smell the neighbor's coal furnace when he puts it on, same distance away. I fully suspect that will be close enough to feel some of the effects of the kerosene smelling. But there are no setback issues, no setback rules, no real studies yet that say you are at risk if you're within so many feet of a frac fluid pond.
So what you're saying, we're like an experimental stage, or you're using us as like guinea pigs?
You said that.
I mean, what you describe really is an industrial wasteland for Pennsylvania. It's a possibility.
It could be. It could be, especially when you think about the fact there are 22,000 acres that they want to mine aggressively.
100,000 what?
Yes, over 50 years, leaving behind 13 million tons of chemicals, which they say can't get up. There's 2 ways they could get up. One is their bore could be bad. Their casing, even down in the shale, provides a pathway to the aquifer. That hasn't happened yet that I know of, but it could happen. Again, think of Deepwater Horizon down there in the Gulf of Mexico. There was no chance nothing was going to happen bad there. But the other way it could get up is like Dr. Bufadel and some others who will be working with the EPA on their study, by the way, are saying that there are pathways upwards that could reach groundwater aquifers.
That's why New York State put a moratorium.
It might. Say that again, please.
That's why New York State put a moratorium.
Exactly. New York State put a moratorium on it. The first moratorium came from New York City, who has the only unfiltered water in the country. They said, no way, no how is anybody drilling in our watershed. And then New York State has one until about July.
And they said, don't do what Pennsylvania did as an example.
So did Maryland. Maryland said, don't do what Pennsylvania did as an example.
I have a copy of a lease that they want me to, well, it's not my land, it's my fiance's land, okay? They want us to sign it. There's a lawyer in Clearfield trying to get all these people together to get a more bargaining power, okay? And what you were saying at the end there about...
Can you speak in?
What you were saying there at the end was, you know, about how much you could get. But from what you're saying tonight, there's not enough money to make it sound to me like it's worth it, because, you know, you're talking about something... I can see the politics here. It sounds to me like all politics. The state wants to go ahead, but they don't even know what it's going to cost. And we've got proof, you said, from states thousands of miles apart, you got people saying that they're getting these same things, reactions and everything. You know, you can't say that that's just coincidental, okay? So, you know, but then again, we're sitting here, they're going to go ahead and do this anyway. There's not a lot we can do. So what are we supposed to do?
Well, there are a couple of resources in here, and I think I have the references on that sheet about leasing. You're right on the right track. That's why I put values and assumptions about water. You don't want to ruin your water. You don't want to ruin your neighbor's water. However, if you're facing a leasing issue, you do have to think through that. There are certain things that can be done to reduce the environmental impact of these companies on the land that you lease. They may not make them as happy to deal with you as, say, somebody else, but there are things you can do. So what you really have to do is look up, like the piece on Senator Casey's, the report on Senator Casey's website for landowners is a good piece to read to sort of get yourself thinking through some of the issues. But most importantly, you have to talk to your neighbors, because the people, there's a website called Shale Country. Anybody ever seen it? Shale Country. It's put out by an energy lobbying group, and it's very, you know, fancy, happy-go-lucky stories about people who leased and made lots of money. But what's insidious about it is that the person who put it together said, well, we just wanted to make sure that all these people that came out from the city and now don't want country people to have any money, blah, blah, blah. They started into a whole big thing of setting neighbor against neighbor. One of the very serious dynamics, and Father Mark, this is a very serious pastoral dynamic that you'll have to deal with. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just using you as an example because I told our new pastor in Sykesville, there are pastoral issues involved with this shale drilling, because neighbor will be set against neighbor. Money will be set in front of, in your faith tradition, Jesus Christ. Money will be higher than Jesus Christ. And those are the kinds of things that people, right down to your conscience and your thinking and your group, you have to just work through that with your neighbors. No one can tell you what to do, but you need to think of it as not just a financial problem, but a moral problem as well. Thank you, Father Mark. I didn't mean to use you as a prop. So, I love this guy. He used to be my pastor in Sykesville. Y'all know how good a musician he is, by the way? People who go to the church. Has he showed himself yet? All right.
Sir, my question is, and I don't understand, and maybe you can educate me. If me, as a plain citizen, or any business owner, corporation, manufacturer, has to follow rules and regulations of a government agency, the EPA, first of all, why is the gas industry exempt? Number two, if they are there to protect the environment, then to me, part of that is to protect me as a person. They're failing there. And if they see all these studies about people being sick and losing their water and that, then why is it EPA or DEP or whatever agency saying, wait a minute, no more permits. We need more information. Because if the average person wants to do it, you need engineers, architects, accountants, attorneys. You need everybody but Jesus to go in front of their board and plead, almost beg them to issue you a permit or whatever you might need. And I'm having a hard time understanding that. And I should not have to call a politician. I've said it 100 times. They're educated, intelligent people who are supposed to represent me. I see a couple of them in the audience. I don't have to go see my county commissioner. He's sitting here. He knows how I feel. So I just don't understand how there's a double standard. Where are we failing, or what has to be done? And I'm not here. I'm learning pros and cons myself.
Well, as far as I can tell,
Steve,
from
can you come back over here so we don't get that?
as far as I can tell from the looking at the career of John Hanger, former DEP director, he was put in an impossible position to both be the cop on the beat with respect to gas drilling and to be the promoter of gas drilling and to give out permits as quickly as possible. John Hanger would tell you that his agency didn't even have the authority to get bad actors out of the field. That is, gas companies that were doing bad jobs, they could not even pull their permits and tell them, you can't work in the state of Pennsylvania. So there are some serious limitations to DEP and even to EPA with respect to protecting our environment, our water, and our air. What I would say to you is I'm glad your commissioner is here. But ultimately, you being here and everybody else being here that cares about this, we're the ones going to make a difference. It's not so much talking to our politicians as talking with and dialoguing and with each other and being part of a resistance of some sort. Because it's not that you have to be against drilling long term. You can just say there's too many unknown things here. Look what the gas companies are telling their investors. Look what the scientists are saying that know something about this. This is too dangerous. But you know, these kinds of oil and gas industries, they go after something called the play. The play is really a gamble. It's a gambling term. It means I'm going to put down a wager in the hopes that I get rich. I'm going to prospect. I'm going to stake my claim. That's the mindset of the industry, and that's the way they work, and they've worked like that for hundreds of years. People right now, what's really different, I hope you take nothing more home with you than this. This technology is not shallow well drilling. That had some problems. This is talking about underlaying almost the entire state of Pennsylvania, 22,000 acres of it, as completely as possible, every square mile, with 13 million tons of chemicals that they can't be absolutely certain are going to stay where they put them. Now, the underground injection, as far as the exemption goes, the Underground Injection Control Agency or something of the federal government, which works with EPA and is subject to the Safe Drinking Water Act, they control those underground injection wells where dangerous chemicals and laced in water and chemicals are kept for storage so they don't hurt us on the surface. Their standard is it can't come back up within 10,000 years. They have to do a 300,000 or 400,000 study per well to make sure that the geologic formation will contain and their operations will contain through pressure all of that bad stuff down there so it doesn't hurt us on the surface. This industry, near as I can tell, didn't want to have anything to do with that. They weren't going to be able to operate under those conditions. So in 2005, they got, through the administrations of Vice President Dick Cheney, former head of Halliburton, something that is not called the Halliburton loophole in our federal law, but it's called Halliburton loophole for shorthand because it exempted the natural gas industry from having to to abide by the Safe Drinking Water Act as these underground injection control wells have to do.
Thank you.
I live along the west branch of the Susquehanna, and the seismographic testing was done right up to the river on the Army Corps of Engineer land. I have two questions. How close to the river are wells permitted to be drilled? Is there some setback from the river and streams? And the second question is, are the results of the seismographic testing available to people?
Let me ask if anybody else knows the actual answer to that first part. Is there a setback for rivers, Tom? Jenny, have y'all read it?
There's seismic that they're doing.
No, you talk.
That they're going to drill.
Okay,
Right,
is it a question of the
All
seismic or?
No.
There's gas there.
What's
Now,
the-
they can drill back here 2 miles away from the river and still get her gas.
Yeah.
I
They could.
understand that.
Yeah.
But how close to the river can they physically put a well?
I would hazard a guess here. It's not the same. A residence is anywhere from 250 feet, something ridiculous like that. It's something equally ridiculous on the order of 1,000 feet or so. They are one of the issues that the Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, one of the groups on your reference sheet, is looking into. Is they have put some of these wells practically right beside lakes. I mean, I've seen the pictures. I'd say if they were not permitted to do so, they wouldn't be right beside these lakes and rivers. So I really don't know the answer to your question, but I would bet that it's less than 1,000 feet.
Okay.
You know, no more than 1,000
Get the
feet.
water, right?
But
That'd be a lot cheaper to get the water that they need if they're right next to the water source.
That's a good point. One of the things, they could get a permit to draw water from the river for the fracking, and that way they don't have to bring so many trucks in. And that, in fact, has happened.
And then the results of the seismographic testing, can we assume, I'm assuming that there's not gas uniformly throughout Pennsylvania, but still pockets. Is it public information that you can get to find out what areas?
Seismographic testing is done by private companies who sell the information to gas companies. You're not privy to seeing it as a private citizen. However, I would make a slight amendment to what you said. Seismographic testing is not so much to find gas, especially with Marcellus. They know the gas is in there.
Yeah.
It's to look at the underground geology to look for, say, abandoned well. It's actually a good thing in certain respects in that it will allow them to see some of the naturally occurring fractures in the shale, allow them to see some of the potential pathways where their drilling fluids could get out. So in that respect, it's not something that's altogether bad. We had that decision on our farm, seismic testing going on all around us. They probably could have figured out our 50 acres without doing it. We told them they could do it, and then it turned out they didn't do it anyway because they could figure out our 50 acres without doing it. But the way we've approached this issue is to be open-minded as much as we can about all aspects of this industry, because any aspect can hurt us, especially if we get ignorant about it and don't figure out what they're trying to do. I think on seismographic testing, they're trying to figure out not whether there's gas there. They know there's gas in the Marcellus, except in areas where hard coal and heat and pressure from hard coal drove the gas out millions of years ago. But in our part of the country right here, there's gas in the Marcellus. So they know it's there. They're not looking for that. They're looking for everything from the top all the way down to that, through which they have to. They're going to find the mines under my place, and they're going to find other things that they need to be aware of as they decide what to do.
They're looking for a crash in the rock and extend down. This is what the man told me.
They're looking for what?
This is what the man told me, that they were looking for the fractures because they'll stay away if they're a good company. They'll stay away from those fractures because that water will come back up them fractures. And they don't want to pollute anything that way. So this here testing will show that. But if it's one of these fly-by-night companies, they don't care where they drill. And they'll drill a hole any place.
That's a good point, and to just add to it, they don't want to lose the gas either. They're down there to get the gas. If they lose it out of the shale, they don't get it up the pipe, and they don't get to sell it.
Yeah, it seems interesting to me that we're going to recognize 99%.
Look closer to your mouth. Did you turn it off?
Yeah? Okay. 99% of people lives downstream from the Marcellus. Well, that's what's going to happen. And it isn't whether you're a half mile from it. If you live here in Curvensville, we're about to have 1 foot up here on Builder's Run. and something happens to that one on Belcher's Run, it's going to impact Harvardville, Anderson Creek, the Susquehanna, the whole way down here. So it isn't how close you are. If something happens, it's going to impact everything downstream from it. And that's what watersheds are. So you know, when we're talking about, well, geez, I'm lucky, I don't have it run within 10 miles of me. If you live somewhere along this river and we get the Susquehanna impacted, it's going to impact you. Yeah. It's going to impact the water supply. Yeah. And we have the most unusual geological structure. I talked to the national labs, and they said it is really problematical, this drilling here. Mm-hmm. And there is models. The national labs have models that they say, why aren't those models being used? I talked to EPA. The EPA said, well, we'll try to use them. But those government groups have ways they can test, and we're not getting any results from their government groups. So I'm hoping somewhere along the line, but New York's using the models. They know what's going to happen in their geology. We are in an unusual geological situation here with all kinds of faults. And those faults is where that stuff can migrate up out of the ground. But we're not going to stop them, but I agree with him. We need to protect ourselves as best we can.
Because people have had problems if it's done improperly. Without the right kinds of setbacks, it's cracked their well casings, it's caused problems. So it is something to be very wary of and make sure you're on top of exactly what they're doing.
I don't own the gas rights on my property, but if they should decide to put a well on it, do I, as surface owner, have any recourse with determining where it would be or some of the stuff they might do on my property?
Let me change the battery in this and see if that'll fix it, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to question, right? I'm in the same position. And the surface owner has some right to negotiate reasonable access provisions, but must give access. So there the hand is favors the gas company. If they say I need to be here on the top of your pretty hill to get my gas out, then you got to make a way for me to get there. And I can't say to them as only the
it's much better.
I can't say to them only as the surface owner, I need you to put it on the far side of the property. Your rights are very limited. However, there's an interesting new wrinkle. And I talked about this with Ross Piper, who's the PSU, the head of the agricultural law department at PSU. It's actually his mother that's going to get a Marcellus well 3,500 feet from us. And I was talking to Ross, and I was saying, look, if they do end up, if we can't stop it, and they drill on your mother's property, why can't I say, well, if you want the gas under mine, drill from over there? I'm not going to stop you from getting it. Just go underground. And Ross kind of indicated as a lawyer that such a test case may come up at some point. Reasonable access in the era of, long laterals, as much as 2 miles, you could make a case in court possibly that a surface disturbance wasn't necessary. Now, another thing that comes up there is that in the case of his mother, Exco Holdings has that well permit. I don't know who has one on ours. If those two don't cooperate, someone might decide to drill on ours anyway, And I would be inclined to tell the courts if I had to, hey, it's not my problem they can't work together. They should work together. They have unitizing clauses in their leases that say they can work together. So we have to fight back a little bit as split estate owners who have only surface rights and try to get smarter about defining what reasonable access means. Now, to me, that's a conversation that we've had in our household, and we put it on the back burner because most of the time what we talk about in our household is a moratorium. We don't want to see any of this stuff happening. But we don't know if we can stop these folks. We don't. So to be prepared, you have to think about some of those other kinds of options.
If an area near you that is getting a pad has already been all strip mined, does that make it more chance that some of the gases will be up, and is there any condition, is it too far, not deep enough? And is there inspectors, like on the mining inspectors, how often does somebody check these sites? And since there's so many sites going in, are they going to hire a lot more people to start inspecting these sites and making sure that all these things don't happen?
I'm not aware that formerly strip mined areas have any particular bearing on how this gas drilling is done. Undermined areas like ours, there are certain precautions they have to take going through these mines, which are often filled with water, etc. What was the second part of your question?
Do they have a lot inspectors like they had mining
inspectors? One of the last things John Hanger did as DEP secretary was he imposed a lot more fees on permitting and so forth. He jacked it up big time to get money since there was going to be no severance tax. And he added a lot of inspectors. However, if you look at what they have now, something on the order of 70 to 80 inspectors statewide. And we're talking about a drilling activity of probably 3,000 wells a year. So to a large degree, DEP's strategy is to identify the good actors, that is the good drilling companies, and try to reward them and have them do more of the work, and to, clamp down on the bad actors. It's a very, very blunt instrument. It is not anything like having inspectors close enough to you and I where we live that we can call them on the phone and say, like I would have liked to the other night up at Cider Mill Road. I would have liked to call an inspector and say, I'm standing out here getting a headache, 500 feet from this flaring. Would you come and tell me if that's okay? Is that supposed to happen? What about Miss Lott, who's laying in her bed over there, 80 years old? We don't have that kind of access right now.
One more question. I'm in a permitted area, okay, and I didn't let the seismic testing. I don't have a whole lot of land, but I do own the mineral rights. How will I know when they do the well, if they take my gas?
Mineral and gas rights, though, are different. Your coal and your gas can be different.
I have the rights, though. I went back into the 1800s.
She hasn't leased.
She has both.
She hasn't leased. The question is, if some of the people next to you have leased?
They're getting ready to put a well in. There's a well.
Right.
I have a map, and I'm at the edge of the permit.
Right.
And they wanted to do seismic tests, but they didn't want to pay me anything for that, and I don't have much land. I just didn't know.
Here's how I understand it from what I've read, and I'm not necessarily an expert on this piece, but say they put a long lateral that sidles right up next to your property.
How am I going to know?
And they frack it. The fractures may end up going into a significant portion of the shale underneath you, and yet their lateral is not actually on your property per se. This is one of the reasons people are talking about the so-called issue of forced pooling, is because to a certain degree you have to think about whether or not it makes sense to be on the up and up and get what you're owed, by having a law in place that says they can't sort of accidentally on purpose take some of your gas, versus saying, we know we're doing it. In fact, we'll come right underneath you and we'll pay you the market share. Those protections are not there yet.
No, I called someone and they said that it would be up to the coal company that's got the well. All right, the people that own it, mine.
Yeah, it's a very murky area right now, and there are people at the state legislature that have talked about forced pooling laws, but I don't know what the status of it is right now. In the slideshow I showed you, the West Virginia Surface Owners Rights Organization, WVSORO, they have an excellent piece that I've scanned through about some of the things to think about in terms of pooling. Again, sort of in the worst case scenario thinking, if it's going to happen anyway, don't let the gas companies mess you over while they do it. The same thing I'd say to leasing and so forth. People getting together and so forth can get better deals if it's going to happen anyway. However, when you get back to some of the risk that we've described in tonight's presentation, you sort of want to really think hard about what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen until we know that it's actually safe. There's been no single study of the long-term cumulative environmental impacts of this industry since it came into being, this technology came into being 20 years ago. No single study, and plenty of studies showing not just anecdotal data, but system-level data like pollution in Dallas, Fort Worth, and others, that it's a problem. And yet the industry is allowed to proceed. In Europe, a lot of times they abide by something called the precautionary principle when it comes to these kinds of environmental issues. That principle says not that the world can be zero risk, but if our science tells us that the risk could be as serious as the ones that we've described here tonight, then the only moral way to proceed is via the precautionary principle, wait till you know for sure, or better than we do now. But unfortunately, America has never been a place in which the precautionary principle has taken much root, especially when it comes to the oil and gas extraction industries. We have a little bit of a problem there. And Dr. Boufidel at Temple University, in his presentation, again, I've got a link to it there on the sheet, he believes it should apply to this situation, but he can't make it so. Only our political leaders, at the insistence of ourselves, can say, we can't run this gamble. That's what the folks in New York and New York City and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and other places down to small townships are starting to say as they put together ordinances just to ban the stuff for the time being. And they have good, solid reasons for saying so.
Sir, I wasn't going to ask this, but I will. I can speak loud enough. Well, case clear to the formation of the shale.
Yes.
Might be a dumb question, but I just wonder if they drill like 100 feet through rock that they don't actually case that and then bring the casing down.
There are multiple layers of casing. Chesapeake Energy actually has the one slide I showed with the pretty pictures of the fracking job. They have a very detailed description of the casing procedure. And there are very, very careful procedures that they use going through the water aquifer. I'm not denying that. If they do it right, they can go through the water aquifer initially and not impact it. But to some degree, some of them use as much as 7 layers of casing. But when you get down to the production casing in the shale, the only illustrations in literature that I've seen on it indicate that it's a long, somewhat 5-inch pipe production casing around which is concrete. I'm not sure how thick the concrete is. That's called the annulus. They pump concrete down and then back up so that it surrounds it. Then they pop those holes in it with a perforating gun, and then they force the fluid through that. And the concrete itself and the steel casing is all that sort of stands between, the shale gas, and they want to get it into the production so they can get it out. But I don't know for sure beyond, say, the first 1,000 feet, which should be well past most aquifers, groundwater aquifers, how much they have to do. Only recently did DEP issue new casing standards, including, if you can believe this, a requirement to use a little tool that makes sure the drill goes down the center of the hole that's being drilled instead of wandering around down in there and making one side of the casing thicker than the other, of the hole thicker than the other, so that when you actually put the concrete in there, you might have 4 inches on one. I'm making this up. And maybe 1 inch on this side, which is going to be subject to cracking. So there is a device that's been in the industry for years that DEP only just now required these folks to use. That's the kind of stuff that makes me crazy. because if you have an engineering solution and you're running an agency like DEP, you don't sit on your thumbs about that for several years while this industry just goes wild with all kinds of bad actors out there. Yes.
I got a couple questions. Is there anybody in here that's been contacted by any of the gas companies? Or because there's a lawyer group, Natio, down in Clearfield, that's representing a whole conglomerate of people right now, and they're offering a percentage. And they don't get anything unless you get at least 15%, and they're going to try to, they've got 5 companies they're going to talk to here shortly, and they're going to ask for $3,500 per acre. And that's for anybody that has the rights, okay? And everybody it would be equal. So, on that end of it, if anybody's interested, I can give them a copy of get your names and get a copy to you. And as far as the moral issues and stuff, after looking at this, I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, because I've also dealt with my own lawyer out of Kane, Mr. Ross, and showed him the lease from my lawyers down here, and so I've been kind of involved in it quite a bit, and I'm not sure what to do yet, but I've been going to all these meetings.
Tom, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah.
But if I'm in a permitted area, I don't know how they can take me out of it.
I think that's part of the problem, is that we just don't know enough about what's going on here. Because I've seen 20% royalties in Pennsylvania, in Jefferson County. I've seen a group out of Catania operating, I think it was 9,000 an acre. But if you look in the Barnett Shale, it's more developed. They're getting 24,000 an acre down there and 24% royalties.
Yes, that Catania example is in the slideshow. I mentioned the ones that are trying to assemble 500,000 acres. They're doing that, offering anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 an acre. The problem is they may not make the deal go down. They may end up stringing along a whole bunch of landowners, getting them signed on the dotted line to be part of that package, and it could all fall through. The financing could fall through. They could lose out. It's very complicated. You really need good legal advice, and you have to think through the other questions as well.
There's also more there. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but below the Marcellus Shale, there's another layer called Utica.
Yeah.
And below that, there's another one. The Utica is worth a lot more, they tell me, than what the Marcellus is going to be. So you're looking at a lot there.
I will make as many PowerPoints as humanly possible. I know that actually there's a lot of there's some prospecting going on in that. I think one of the wells near us, going down 8,300 feet, which is lower than the Marcellus in our township, is projected to look exactly for that potential by doing just in a vertical drill and a fracking straight out like in conventional drilling to kind of get an idea of whether it's worth it. You have a question?
You have a question?
Yeah.
You have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is gas wells just like made out of metal?
Gas fields? Gas wells?
Yeah, are they made out of metal?
Is your question, are gas wells made out of metal? Mostly, yes, actually. Most of the stuff up there they use to get down there is steel and metal, and things down in the ground are mostly steel because they're dealing with rock. Good question.
I wanted to take a moment just to address the notion of the civic process here. And first off, to thank Steve and Carol, who lives here in Burnsville, for putting this on this evening. Let's give them a hand for doing this. A quote came across the Facebook page of mine from a friend of mine that reminded us that it is not the function of the government to keep the citizenry in check. It is the function of the citizenry to keep the government in check. And I want to remind everybody here tonight that folks that are doing this job, that are doing this because they care, They're dedicated to a cause, yes. Some of you may agree with it, some of you may not agree with it, but I believe everybody in the room would agree that we have a lot to learn on this issue. Myself, being a local borough councilman, I can tell you, other than a few key people here, thanks to Terry and a couple other folks that I know because I'm involved with them, this information's been filtered down, but we're not getting this on a local level, and there are mechanisms that are in place that allow us to be able to address these issues through educational outreach such as this, support of folks like this that are looking to offer balanced information out to the community, whether there are local ordinances or things that we can pass countywide, statewide. The bottom line is this, folks, that we as politicians, whether I'm making $45 a month representing you locally or whatever the county commissioners make, or with Bud and we saw what Joe's making from all this, okay? The fact of the matter is that we're people. And just like I'm a teacher as well, in the educational industry, in any industry, you've got good people and you've got people that are in it for themselves. And it's no different in politics. There are people that take public service very seriously and they're in it because they're serving the public, and that's what they believe their mission is as an American. And they get in the game and they get engaged. You have other folks such as Carol, God love her. She calls me up and starts talking to me about this, and I say, Carol, who do you have locally that's on your side that's helping you out? She said, I'm in. So the bottom line is this, wherever you come down on this, if you believe what you believe, don't be apathetic about it. Don't be afraid to stand up and say, hey, look, you, Mr. and Mrs. Public Official, work for me. And here's the information that I have, and I demand that you honor your oath of office and you represent me in this issue. And if, you know what? And if they're not listening, you make them listen. That's what it comes down to. So when you leave here this evening, you remember that, and you get your phone book out, and you make phone calls, and you hold your public officials to account for what you believe. It's not enough to just wait for election day and say they didn't do what I wanted, I'm going to go ahead and vote them out. It's a consistent effort. And there's always going to be corruption that you're going to need to fight. But if you sit back and you just simply say, well, what can you do? That's the way it always is. It's always been that way. Well, then it's always going to be that way. So that said, I want to thank these folks for coming to our town and doing this tonight. And I expect that we'll see a lot of people at Borough Council about this issue. We need to know what you think. So thanks for coming out today. Thank you.
I know when I did originally talk to Sam, I did say, he said, Rudy, lovely, that's in Kerwinsville. And I said, nobody, everybody's from Dubois Way, Jenny, Tom over Big Run, and just mostly over that area. But I found out I do have people behind me here too. We have the Anderson Creek Watershed who came up tonight and helped set up and gave us a lot of help. And I'm glad to see that a lot of the people from the area did come out to the meeting.
Absolutely.
And I'm very thankful that they did. And I do hope, like you said, that they don't go home and forget about it. I don't know who it was that said, once you know, you can't not know, but that's what happened to me. And it's a year later, and I'm still here thinking, when I originally found out what was going on and started digging into it deeper, the few of us that started the organization, I just thought, I really did, I seriously thought, oh, well, this is common sense. This is right in my face, and this is not going to take long. A couple months here, we'll have everybody. Yeah, I really was dumb enough to think that. A couple months, we'll have everybody on board. They'll realize what's going on, and they'll realize it has to stop now. And here it is, a year later, and I'm still in the same boat. But I'm glad a lot of people came out, and I hope they really think about it and take it seriously.
Well, again, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Not a question, but we have shallow wells, different companies, and we were not contacted, and I think that's who the gentleman has. It was Power and Dominion. But here about probably the 1st of August, I had a phone call, and we have 350 acres, about 15 miles out of Kerwinsville. And the offer was $86,000 a month for the first 2 years, and then it would drop a little, and then it would come up for the next 20 years. And they were locking it in for 20 years. And I said to her, this is one of those things that sounds too good to be true. It is. She said, no, it's not too good. Wouldn't $86,000 a month sound good? And I said, yes, it would. And she named neighboring property owners, one of them being a big coal company. And she said, I think I have it sold to them. And I'm going, really? And she said, oh, yeah, I have them locked up. One is a doctor, and of course they didn't go for it. She called back in about 2 days, and she said, oh, I've talked to my boss, and it was naturally a gas company from Texas, and they changed their mind that they will give $1,500 an acre flat, period. They will take over all of our shallow wells, and you're done forever from it. So I called back, probably first in November, just to see how that was going for her. And she said, oh, we're not doing anything. She said, I'm not allowed to buy any, do any leases. I'm not allowed to buy any shallow wells. She said they can't do anything with what they already have. She said they're not going to be drilling any new wells for a long time. So I don't know, that might take some of the pressure off, but those wells that are out there, I'm sure the pipelines, I haven't seen any pipeline going in anywhere yet where I am around, but I don't know. And with you saying you're on the border, I know we went to the first one that was drilled in this area up around New Washington, Lake Joe's area, and watched that and talked to the people because of our concerns and questions. And they went down naturally in the middle of several properties, and it's supposed to all be equally divided, but I know when they put a polling or whatever it's called in for the shallow wells, my parents and everybody else lost out, and that was put on the coal owner's property. So guess who got all the money?
That's the coal owners on this one. It's Shannon Ronnie. It's the one that I'm on the area with. But
you're going to lose because
I know that. One thing I got to say is in the 1950s, the coal miners ruined the water in my area, the whole valley. But DER wasn't created until 1972, so don't think the government's going to step in and save everything. It took them 15 years to develop mining and the inspectors for mining after they ruined the water and stripped it and left the high walls that we've been cleaning up for years and years. And we're still cleaning up. And we pay for it as taxpayers, but nobody's going to let them do that now. And like you said, don't let the government think they're going to do it tomorrow, because it took them 15 years to even start a department to watch the coal miners.
Yeah, that's called externalizing the cost. Coal mining companies and maybe gas companies now may find a way to get in, get what they need, and get out, and leave behind a legacy for which they're not legally responsible. Well, that is distinctly a possibility. I wanted to ask you, do you have a farm?
Yeah.
What do you do on your farm?
Well, I want you to come raise horses on it.
Raise horses. We have a small farm, and I'll tell you one discussion around our house. Now, we're not going to get any money out of this because we don't have, we're a split state, but people like our neighbors, wonderful people, have been farming for generations. They're not going to let a deal with the gas company ruin their farm because they're smart and they got a good lease, and they're making sure that I think in their case they knew they would be drilled under, so they just said, well, we'll go ahead and get the surface lease, and I don't know, I haven't seen their lease, but I know them well enough to know that they don't do stupid stuff, because the stupid thing would be to take a whole bunch of money for your farm and then not have a farm because it got ruined by water contamination. And in our house we talk about how the shale industry says, oh, we're saving farmers. Look at them, they're painting their barns, they're getting new tractors, they're doing all this. Well, first of all, a lot of farms weren't all that sustainable in the first place because they were beholden to powers much larger than them. They're price followers, not price leaders. The reason they're in trouble economically is because somebody else messed them over. And then, okay, yes, they get a windfall from gas drilling. Doesn't mean they're going to be okay after that. Maybe they leave town. Maybe they get out of farming. But the way we sum it up, you might save the farmer, but you may not save the farm. That's why I say one of the value issues you have to think about here is, do we want to ruin our own water? We know we don't want to. Do we want to ruin our neighbor's water? Of course we don't want to. The minute we do that, we don't have farms anymore. We're all living in Florida or somebody, and Pennsylvania's a gas field.
Can we localize this?
One question I'd like to ask you is, once that water's contaminated, it's contaminated forever. You can't clean it up. It's not like doing an acid drainage. It's done.
Groundwater.
Am I correct?
It's very...
With the fracking, if the fracking water gets into groundwater,
yes,
it can't be cleaned up.
There's no good way to clean up a groundwater aquifer.
It's polluted forever.
I think that was part of what Dr. Bufadel was trying to get at with his spill model. Frac pond spills, it percolates down. It takes a long time. Groundwater moves very slowly. And it could show up 50, 100 years later.
Or it could show up in shorter periods of time.
So there's a legacy of pollution here that could be created for future generations.
Well, I actually have a question for the group, because I misstated when I said we haven't really heard anything about this at Borough Council, but we haven't heard much. The one issue that has come to us was a recent application from there was an application to withdraw water. And they want to pull 100 trucks a day in here to pull water out of the river. So there's one issue that we're dealing with. But I think a lot of what we deal with in Kerwinsville is, we're in this little bowl, and it's a very tight borough. We don't have a lot of land in the borough. We're small. So I think a lot of people are thinking, well, we're not going to be drilling right in the borough. It's not going to affect us here so much. And I'm wondering, just absolute solid facts, what do you folks know about what's going on in the immediate area that could well affect our quality of life here in Kerwinsville? Mickey, you were talking about what's going up on Greenwood. Terry, you've got a lot of information. Are there any facts here that you would like to share?
That could have a very adverse impact.
And now, what is it we're talking about?
We're talking about that Anderson Creek watershed.
Actually drilling up there?
Yes.
Yes, sir. You have your hand up.
We went up to the Pine Township council meeting back in December. I was the one that went up there, and they're actually the headwaters for 3 watersheds: Pine Township, Clearfield's water, and also DuBois's Anderson Creek water.
Right.
So they're the headwaters. Apparently, they only have about 40 homes. I don't need to see them. They only have like 40 residents up there that they can have any influence or have any say-so on the drilling that's going on up there, because there's a lot of it going on where they have the blowout up in the National Forest area. Now, I invited them in Falls Creek. We had CELDEM. It was an organization, a legal organization down from Carlisle, and they will protect townships if they want to take this to court.
Hey, Steve, can you...
Yes, that's the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.
There's a switch on the bottom if it's
Steve was at that meeting, and I wanted him to address that and tell you folks that townships feel like they're being overwhelmed by these drillers that are coming in, and they don't know what to do.
Right.
So we had CELDEF come in, and Steve was at that meeting, and I wanted him to relate to you before you leave what he found out. And there's going to be another meeting of CELDEF trying to get the townships to put in protective ordinances for themselves. And I think Steve would be a better guy to tell you what he...
Well, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, local government, and the power of the people, the sovereign power of the people. They work in many areas. They've helped farmers dealing with sludge being put on their property. They've helped people trying to keep out, animal feeding organizations, big ones. Now they're working with people that are impacted by fracking. And one of the things that they're finding a little bit of traction on right now is some townships are interested in doing what Pittsburgh did, which is basically just banning it. In other words, the Oil and Gas Act will not allow you to regulate this industry. That belongs to the state. But the township could pass, it's a very sophisticated piece of ordinance that includes a Bill of Rights for the local people, and that references the state constitution that says that we have a constitutional right to clean air and clean water. Now the state figures, well, yeah, you do, but we're having DEP take care of that. So we're, so what CELDEF is doing, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, is helping people to figure out whether they want to take that step of saying, in our township, you may not drill. Now, it's tricky because depending on how valuable that township is to the gas industry, they just may bring their high-powered lawyers up from Houston and put a hurt on the township supervisors. So they have to think it through, and many are thinking it through. But in Pittsburgh, when they did it, they didn't do it overnight. Pittsburgh spent a year, city council did, looking into this issue, doing education things like this, reading up on it. And finally they decided to pass an outright ban on drilling within the city limits of Pittsburgh. And there's a few areas of Pittsburgh city limits that could have been drilled, not so many. So they weren't directly in harm's way like everyone else, but they took it seriously. They got a unanimous vote from the city council. How often does that happen on anything? A unanimous vote to ban hydraulic fracturing of this type in the city. So that's what CELDEF is doing, is they're willing to come out to borough councils, township supervisor meetings, citizen meetings, to explain their approach. That one way to go is just to rise up and say, we hold this power to protect ourselves. The government can't take it away from us, and we're going to implement that our power by passing this ordinance to say, keep your drilling out of here. And so far, from what I've read, there hasn't been a suit against Pittsburgh or anyone else that's passed the ban. There have been, according to CELDEF, about 100 different townships over the last decade or so that have passed similar ordinances about other issues, and only 2 or 3 suits that have been lodged. I don't know the results of that, but that is certainly another way to go, is to look into a local ordinance. Zoning ordinances are, you have to have a zoning law. We don't have that in our township. Zoning ordinances are very limited in terms of what they can do about gas drilling. They can say something about where they are, but they can't say anything about not permitting it. And the state right now, Joe Scarnati, again, I know this personally because I talked with him about this, trying to get the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors to agree to a model template of zoning ordinances that basically would allow drilling by right in almost all zoning categories except residential. And there they have to stay away, I think, in residential areas. They have to get a special exemption, and they have to stay away 250 feet from a home. It's crazy. If you look at the PSAT sites and look at the model template, and I know that Joe manipulated. I asked Joe. I said, and I asked the people at his office. I said, "Are you in favor of forced pooling? Are you in favor of drilling being allowed as a zoning by right, means you can put it in any zoning district statewide?" He said, "Oh, well, we're letting the township supervisors handle that, the PSATs." But I feel a little hand of Joe Scarnati in the template that came out of PSATs, the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. They are very savvy about co-opting folks, very savvy about it. And right now, even though I've got goats birthing back in the barn and I do need to get home, I'm going to be spending a couple of minutes this weekend trying to get into the upcoming annual meeting of PSATs, because I know townships are under threat. Some legislators would like to wipe them off the face of the map and say they don't exist anymore. And at the same time, they're being asked to buy into this gas drilling through this model ordinance. And I'd like to see whether we can have a conversation about getting some of this kind of information to the supervisors, because they actually do have a little bit of power still. They have a little bit of power still. And they'll have more power the more they exercise it. That's what we're talking about.
I'm looking through before you, get moving, do you have a sheet here with your local contact information and your group so the folks here can? I see a lot of contact info here, but specifically, do you have yours, or can you give it to them real quick? You got cards. Does everybody have their contact info? If you're going to follow up, if you want to follow up directly.
I have a sheet here to sign up to. If anybody wants to put your email address on it, you can receive information from our group also. Or if you don't have email and you'd like a phone call, then please take one of the cards.
On KATV, probably about a week and a half ago, on their news all day and evening, they said that Pennsylvania was too tough for the drilling companies, and the gas companies were leaving Pennsylvania and going to West Virginia. That they're washing their hands of Pennsylvania. So just keep your ears open and see. But that was from Pittsburgh TV.
Who voted for Corbett?
My name's Melinda, and I'm with Nature Bounds. We're a national nonprofit headquartered in the Fairfield area. And federal Congressman Glenn Thompson, they should not be funding it. So we reached out to local officials.
Can you say that again?
Sure. My name's Melinda, and I'm with Nature Bounds. And hello. Hi. And anyways, the Glenn Thompson, who is, the guy in the 5th District that does the Congress, he is sitting on a subcommittee that actually funds all of the environmental funding. So the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, everything comes down to how him and his committee vote. So not only do you want to touch base with the local officials, you really got to touch base with him too.
Good suggestion. Thank you very much.
Sure. The road, so I was taking the side roads, Erie Turnpike from my house in Bigford to Clearfield to Kerwinsville here, or I'd be riding down past Litz Bridge and Park Avenue. When I would be riding out through the country roads, there are sections where the road is just literally it's as though there were two ways in the road just paralleling down. Absolutely. There are places where the side of the road, and I on a bicycle can notice this, where the layers of asphalt are just bouncing, they're disappeared. It's as though you were riding through an ancient geological dig or something, where you have the layers of road disappearing down into nothing, and where you have these huge tire marks parallel to the side of parallel to the lane of the road. It's just as though it were a waves in the road.
Our main street is a state road, so we don't have any control over it. That's and so all we can do is put a cop up there and say, bust for speeding, but there's really not much more we can do.
The other thing was that then I happened to meet a man who said that a lot of the roads were Pinchot roads from Governor Pinchot's time. They had no substructure under them. They were just paved over to get the farmer out of the mud. So everything will sink down in. Anything that's heavy enough. And I never noticed that when there were just coal trucks in the road. I never noticed that much destruction. So there has to be some other thing that's out there. And I'm thinking drilling water, fracturing, pipes. What is it? It has to be something. It's not the coal trucks as far as I can tell.
Well, I